What's up, guys? Welcome back to the LTL Podcast. I'm here with Steve.
Oh, ho.
And this week we have a bunch of more off-ice stuff to talk about because it's the NHL, and it's always fun to talk about this kind of nonsense. But um, a little bit of on-ice stuff too. But I just want to start off with there was just an incident that occurred with I believe it was a high school hockey player. Um, you know, Teddy Balkin, who unfortunately had fallen on the ice, and then the story was that like somebody was going too fast and they couldn't avoid it, and he got hit in a collision. And unfortunately, he did pass away. I'm sure you guys have seen all the different things that the NHL has done, and moments of silence, and all the thing that one of the things that I think as a hockey community has kind of become part of like our culture is leaving the sticks out on your front door overnight when a prominent member passes away. So I just want to extend our condolences and whatever kind of positive energy or anything that we can kind of contribute to put out there into the universe for his family, his friends, his teammates, his loved ones, all that kind of stuff. Just wanted to acknowledge that an unfortunate loss for the hockey community at large, and just wanted to just acknowledge that, do our little part to kind of continue on his legacy and memory, and that whole thing. So rest in peace, Teddy Balkin. Lost a member of our hockey community too soon. So just wanted to kind of put that out there. So switching gears here, I guess we'll stick on the unfortunate news category. And unfortunately, this news is now that we have to talk about Evander Kane again, which, if I recall, last time we did a whole episode basically about him, I said, I hope I never have to speak his name again. And unfortunately, we have to talk about him again. And it's not because it's not because the San Jose Sharks have decided to terminate his contract, because literally everybody saw that coming. I mean, literally there was nobody in the world who thought that wasn't going to happen.
Especially with the fake vaccine card and everything. I mean, that was just a whole mess.
But the reason we're talking about it, because if Vander Kane just got canned, that wouldn't be news because that was an inevitability. But the NHLPA has decided that this is the hill that they're going to die on for some reason. Now, the San Jose Sharks did not terminate his contract because of the gambling debts, right? They didn't terminate his contract because of the abuse allegations. They didn't terminate his contract because of him being a deadbeat father, right? They terminated his contract because not only did he violate the NHL's COVID protocols, he then went to the AHL and then violated their COVID protocols. So, if you're not familiar with Evander Kane, consider yourself lucky. But just to kind of give you a brief history of this complete idiot that we've had that was in our league. First, he somehow managed to rack up over $27 million in gambling debts, which is quite impressive, actually. He filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. He owed one hotel alone over like $500,000 in gambling debts and unpaid room fees. I'm pretty sure at one point the Sharks paid off some of his fees, I think.
I'm pretty sure. Well, yeah, because the Sharks were on the hook for the money because he used his contract with them as collateral.
Yeah, so he then cost the Sharks some unspecified amount of money on gambling debts. Then I don't think they were married, his wife, the mother of his child. I could be wrong if they were married or not, but she accused him of gambling on his own team, the San Jose Sharks, which the NHL did an investigation of and found was not true. She also alleged that he was abusive, which that investigation is still ongoing. That's still open. She alleged that she owed him X amount of money in child support. He didn't see his children. He didn't raise his children. Then this year, just because he's such a swell guy, he decided that instead of getting the COVID vaccine in order to play in the NHL, he was just going to fake a COVID vaccine card So he added forgery of official government documents onto his resume. And then he went to the AHL, got put on protocol in the AHL, and then flew home to Vancouver, which is in complete violation of the AHL's COVID protocols. So, uh, yeah, his contract was terminated, and the NHLPA has took it upon themselves as the absolutely wonderful governing body that they are to file a grievance against the San Jose Sharks.
I mean,
Why? I don't know.
they don't really have a choice, to be honest. Like, I understand the NHLPA really in this situation should really wash their hands of it, but like they're a union, like their union member filed a grievance and they have to fight for it on his behalf because he's a union, he's a like a paying member of their union, you know? So like as dumb as it is that they have to like fight for this, and as much as I agree with you that like they really shouldn't just like they shouldn't take this fight, they kind of have to. As much as like as dumb as it sounds, like legally they have no choice, you know?
Ultimately, my point in bringing this up, though, is that this is not. First of all, it's not a good look. I understand they have to do it, right? But when you compare this action to the actions of the NHLPA in previous situations, does it not seem like, at the very least, the board is incompetent? I mean,
Inconsistencies in this kind of thing though is tough to navigate because like the players have to file these grievances. The NHLPA can't do it on behalf of the players. So there are other instances where like more justifiably they should have been involved, where they probably didn't get involved because they weren't invited into the situation. Like they can't just unilaterally decide to intervene in something, you know? So like
not
in this
legally,
case,
but I mean, they've put out statements and stuff regarding things before on behalf of
yeah.
players. I mean, that's
Yeah,
really
but
my point, right? Like, when we talked about the Jack Eichel thing, right?
right.
Like, granted, yeah, okay. To your point, maybe he didn't file an injunction or grievance or whatever, but like, they didn't say anything. They were just like, okay,
They
like us.
can't. What do you want them to do? They can't throw the team under the bus because they have to work with that guy. They have to work with the guy who owns the team every year. He's on the board of governors.
But is it
So
not
if they
their
want to,
job to do that though?
no, not unless the player asks them to get involved. Like unless you bring it to the attention of the union, they're not going to get involved. You know. And as much of an open secret as it was that Jack Eichel was having these issues, if he never went to the NHLPA and said like, "Listen, I need some help here," then like they can't do anything. His bet, like as far as I'm concerned, like he was going through the organization, so he's probably dealing with like their internal human resources department, which is probably a nightmare. You know, because they're not bound to like protect you; they're there to protect the organization. So I don't really. The NHLPA really just needs to define better like how they're going to function and like what kind of things they're going to do. Because the only time they ever seem to actually move to do anything is when they're protecting somebody who knows they're in the wrong and files a grievance anyway. Because I feel like everybody else just kind of accepts the fact that like Tom Wilson filed a grievance a couple years back to lower one of his suspensions. I'm pretty sure Brad Marchand also had like a lengthy suspension shortened for himself on a grievance, but otherwise the league like they can't do anything, you know? Like they can make statements all they want, but that's that's about as far as it can go. Like their hands are kind of tied.
Yeah, but even like a statement on some things would be like, if it's the only thing you can do, then why not do it? You know?
Because if it's not going to change anything, then why wade into the waters? Isn't that what the Jack Eichel situation specifically, right?
Well, you have to protect your players, right? Like Jack
Not if
Eichel
they
was
don't ask
clearly
you to,
being
though.
abused by his organization.
Yeah, but if he doesn't ask them for help, they can't do anything. Like they can release a statement, but like it's not going to put any pressure on the organization because realistically, there's no teeth. They can't do anything. So them putting out statements are just going to look hollow, and it's going to be even worse of a PR move because it's like, oh well, look, they're this is all they can do. They don't actually protect their players. You
Yeah,
know?
but isn't it the same end result by not saying anything, just like sitting on the sidelines and being like,
Yeah, but at least this time they don't look like they're making hollow gestures. Like I feel like a hollow gesture is better than no gesture at all, or is worse than no gesture at all. Because like if you don't get involved at all, then it's like, oh well, they're just clearly being ignorant to the whole situation. But if you like wade in halfway, like, oh, we think this is ridiculous, and then you don't have any teeth or any way to back that up, people are just gonna be like, oh well, then what's the point? Like, why'd you say anything at all? Because you can't do anything. Like you have no recourse to do anything. You just made a statement, and the Sabres flipped you off, and now it's like this is it. You know?
I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily agree that like doing nothing is better than. I guess ultimately, like
Well, when
because
when the end result is ultimately doing nothing, why would you make a gesture to make it look like you can do something, ultimately knowing you can't? Is my point. Like that statement doesn't do anything for anybody. It's like, oh, Jack Eichel's like, oh, okay, my union is at least aware of what's going on, but like they should have been aware of what's going on because he should have went to them already. The fact that it dragged out so long, honestly, is just like a failure of on the player and everybody's part. Like it should never have gone on as long as it should have because A, the union should have been involved earlier, but and B, the problem really is though that like the union can't like be based on the way the CBA is set up, like they can't. So, you know, and so I think like the realistic way to do it would be to like change the enforcement mechanisms within the CBA in order to let the union step in on behalf of players without having them have to like make the case for them already.
I don't know. I mean, the real problem is that like when it comes specifically, if we bring it back to this the Evander Kane thing, right? I get it. You have to do this. You have to because like he's a paying member, but it just kind of like really irks me that it seems like we never hear the NHLPA doing anything actually positive in terms of like I'm sure they do, right? I'm not saying I'm not gonna sit here and say like they're a terrible union altogether, but it feels like every time we hear anything big about them, it's like reducing a suspension for a guy that clearly deserved it, or going to bat and dying on this hill for some guy who, in this instance, Evander Kane, who really should never play professional hockey ever again. Just I don't know if it's necessarily like I guess it kind of almost feels like they only take fights in which they can twist the knife to the NHL, regardless of whether or not it's actually a good thing or not. You know,
I
which
mean, those are usually the only fights that they get dragged into. You know, they only get dragged into the ugly situations because otherwise it's handled between like a player's agent and the league or whatever. But like usually they only get dragged into these really messy, like really ugly situations that are really high profile. You know?
well, it 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 feels like the reason that they do a lot of these things isn't on behalf of their players. I guess is the thing, because like I don't know. It feels like a lot of the times they don't really care about their players as much as it's not so much about like let me defend my player as it is to like I'm just gonna do whatever I can just to do the opposite of what the NHL wants. I guess is kind of the thing. Like specifically when it comes to like suspensions, right? Like yes, they have to fight for these lower suspensions if the player asks them, but the fact that they even went in to the last CBA negotiations with the goal in mind to have reduced suspensions on the books anyway, it kind of
I mean,
feels
that was in
like
it's been in the CBA since like 2005 though.
well that's
Like
what I'm
you've been able to
saying
file
like
grievances,
well not the file grievances thing the thing
but
where
like
like
being able to fight to lower suspensions. I mean,
well no
what else?
not the mechanism to do it, the fact that in the last CBA as part of the negotiation they said well we want suspensions reduced across the board, like the mechanism's always been there, right? But like across the board they were like we want lower suspensions, and it's like I get it, but shouldn't dudes that are like actually almost killing people on the ice be held accountable for that? Like,
Yeah, but I guess what they're all they're trying to say is like across the board, they think suspensions are a little too harsh, and like I can see where they're coming from because sometimes see things that are like a guy with no prior history gets like 3 games for something, and it's like I don't really know, but I agree that like they should be held to like you should be holding the suspensions that are like 10 plus games to their original length because clearly they did something or there's some sort of history that enables the NHL to give out a suspension of like that long. But I mean, I don't know. I don't. There's no easy answer for this, really. Like this is just like this is the union functioning as purely as it can. Like this is what it's supposed to do, as shitty as it is.
I don't know. I feel like legally, yes, but at some point, you have to fight because he filed a grievance or whatever.
I mean, whether
But
you like the moral argument isn't really like something they can stand on because they can't like they have a binding legal contract with the NHL. They can't be like, "Oh, we don't want to pursue this case because we disagree with it." Like we disagree with it. They have an obligation to like enact those mechanisms, you know?
but at
Like
what
they don't
point are
have a
you like
choice.
hurting the other players that are in your union by doing something like this? Because like, not only
And
did
that's a,
he like monetarily cost the team that he plays for, but like nobody wants to play with this guy. The
I mean,
Sharks
teams are
themselves
still willing
said
to
it.
sign them.
Well, that
Teams
okay.
still want them.
That's a whole other issue. Like I don't understand that at all. I can't
I don't
wrap my head
either.
around that. That doesn't make any fucking sense to me, like whatsoever. Like
No, yeah, no. I don't know why anybody would want to sign him after all of this, but
not only that, but the teams that were like interested in him didn't make any sense either. Like the Oilers want to sign this guy. Why?
Toronto was interested.
What is Evander Kane gonna bring to the table for the Edmonton Oilers? Like realistically speaking.
I mean, I don't even know how you'd be able to play in Canada without a vaccine.
Well, that's the other thing, right? Like he'd have to get vaccinated, which evidently he clearly isn't because he took it upon himself to forge an official government documentation, which, you know,
He pulled the classic Aaron Rodgers move, you know.
I just really hope I never have to see this guy in the NHL ever again. I mean, honestly, like, does that sound harsh? Maybe, but he's just such a terrible human being that, like,
It's just a bad look for the league, honestly. Like to have a guy like that floating around. It's just bad press, bad publicity. Like no team should really want to be associated with something like that, you know?
I guess that's another interesting conversation that kind of like comes off of this is like, at what point as a team do you stop looking at on ice production and start looking at a person as like who they are? It seems like we're at this weird crossroads with this kind of thing where like we have teams like the Montreal Canadiens who or it was the Coyotes, right, who relinquished that draft pick that they took on some kid who I forget what it was. He like,
It was like some racial, he like bullied some kid or something. I remember
yeah,
it was like some pretty harsh bullying.
we have like the Coyotes who straight up just default a draft pick because they used it on a kid that they didn't want anymore, and they're saying we're not going to have anything to do with this. But then you have teams
You know what the
like,
stupidest part about that situation was? Like the Coyotes were aware of that situation beforehand, and he had made public statements going into that draft about how he didn't want to be drafted because of the negative publicity that surrounded it. You know what I mean?
well,
So
the
the
Canadians
Coyotes,
did the same thing too with that other kid, Logan Mailou.
well, yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like these, like the organizations need to like, but I don't know, man. Like I don't know why you'd take a chance on that because like it's gonna blow up in your face. Like I don't care who you are. Like nobody's gonna be like, wow, this they drafted a kid that threw around racial slurs and got himself like a really lengthy suspension.
You
You know,
know,
like
it just seems like we're at this weird crossroads, right? Where we have certain teams doing things like giving up draft picks for kids that they don't want. And then we have other teams like signing people like Evander Kane or like Tony D'Angelo. You know what I'm saying? Like, I guess my
and then
question is,
PK Subban.
well,
I mean, going out of your way to trade for a guy like that when you know he's had problems in the locker room in the past.
at what point is it not worth it, I guess, ultimately? You know? Because, sure, a guy like Evander Kane might score you 20 to 25 goals, or a guy like Tony D'Angelo might put you up like 40 points in the back end. But should we even be caring about that when they have such horrible track records as human beings, you know?
Yeah, like at what point does like the things you say and do off the ice impact like not your ability on the ice, but like your on ice perception? You know what I mean? Like let's just say like I'm gonna take Connor McDavid as an example because it's like the easiest one, right? Everybody wants Connor McDavid, best player on the planet. Now, what if it came out tomorrow that Connor McDavid was a racist, like a bigoted, fucking hateful person? I'm not saying he is. I imagine he's like a really nice guy. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying, like, what if? Would teams still want him, even if he was still as good as he is, if he was like bigoted? You know what I mean?
It seems like the answer is yes, which is like really unfortunate, I think.
Well, for some teams, clearly, right? Like,
Yeah.
obviously, the Rangers, like, for not to hype up the Rangers, but like, because the Rangers were in the situation with Tony DeAngelo and they picked the team over the player, it seems like some teams, like the Rangers or the Canadiens, with the PK Subban thing, wanting to get themselves out of that locker room problem, even if it wasn't his fault, like having the problem in that locker room, they moved him because of it mostly. So it's like there are clearly teams who value that kind of thing. Are like, yeah, we're just gonna wash our hands of this. But then again, you have the Canadians on the flip side drafting that kid, and then you have the Coyotes doing the same thing, and it's like, and apparently Edmonton and Toronto are both interested in a guy who is allegedly beat up his wife. Not even allegedly, actually gambled, like not on his team, but racked up like I don't know how many millions in gambling debts, like you said. Is a deadbeat dad, clearly not a good dude. And I mean, did you see the video of him like waving a gun around like at his wife, his girlfriend or whatever? Like, shit was crazy. It was like, okay, so this is a guy who has like every red flag has gone up for, and yet teams still want to sign him, and it's like, why? And
It's just like one of these situations where is it worth having such a horrible person on your team for the output that they're going to bring? And I don't even I think that's what a lot of teams on the NHL are looking at as an equation, right? How do we weigh his terrible persona versus his output on the ice? I think this doesn't need to be an equation. You don't even need to look at somebody's on ice production. I don't think that should be part of the factor here. I mean, I get it.
I mean, in this specific instance, yeah, no.
Like NHL teams are in the business of winning, and if a player can help you win, then you're gonna want him on your team. I get that. You're in the business of putting out a winning product on the ice to bring in more fans to make more money. I understand that, but you're also a brand, and having somebody like Evander Kane or Tony DeAngelo associated with your brand is not the best thing either. So even if you're just looking at it from like just a purely monetary standpoint, it's not great. And then second of all, even if you are so ignorant like that you just want to wipe away everything he's done off the ice. You forget about his $27 million in gambling debt. You forget about him allegedly being abusive. You forget about the video of him waving a gun around in his garage. Even if you just isolate it to things he's done within the sport of hockey, he's still violated not only the NHL's COVID protocols, but the AHL's COVID protocols. So clearly the guy doesn't listen to rules. So whatever rules your organization have in place, he's not going to care about them.
I mean, he literally flaunted the state of California's regulations in their face with the fake vaccine card. You know what I mean? Like, if he's not going to listen to the fucking government, like the who rules everything, what chance does an organization think they have at like corralling this guy? You know what I mean? And like getting him under, to buy in and like be a team player. Another thing is, why would you want to bring a guy in who broke protocol for the NHL, AHL team, faked his vaccine card? Because it's clearly showing he has no regard for the players he plays with. He doesn't care about the safety of his teammates. Like, that's not a guy I'd want to be around. Like, regardless how you feel about the vaccine or not, like, if he felt so strongly about it and just didn't get vaccinated but still did everything else right, like he isolated, he didn't break any of the protocol rules, I'd still have a fundamental disagreement with what he was doing, but I wouldn't be able to indict him as a person. You know what I mean? I'd be like, okay, well, maybe he doesn't care as much about other people as he says he does, but like he still kind of cares. Whereas this, it's like, bro, he doesn't give a shit about any of his teammates at all. And like, I don't care who you are, how you're going to try to like argue with me on this. Like, if somebody outside this podcast, the truth of the matter is, like, we're living in the second year of one of the deadliest pandemics on record, and this man is doing everything he can to not get to like almost essentially expose his teammates to it. You know what I mean? Like, he's almost doing everything he can in his power to flaunt the fact that he is like a walking, talking, spreading machine.
It's not like Tyler Bertuzzi who like just didn't get the vaccine but didn't lie about it, Like, I still think it's very ignorant of him to not get the vaccine, of course, but at least, he took it, he openly admitted his decision and said, I'm not getting the vaccine. So the Detroit Red Wings knew what they were in for when it came to that. So, like,
on top of that,
they know that he can't go to Canada. He can't play any games in Canada, et cetera, right?
Right. And on top of that, I'm sure as far as we've heard, he's following all like the protocol rules that the Red Wings have set up for them. You know what I mean? I'm sure he's doing everything that the organization has asked of him as long as he stays unvaccinated. Because we haven't heard anything else about it other than at the beginning of the season when Steve Yzerman made the comments, you know?
Yeah, and
So like, like you said and like I said, like we have a fundamental disagreement with what he's doing, but at the very least he's showing that like he's got a good enough head on his shoulders to say I still care about my teammates enough. I'm going to follow these rules, you know?
yeah, and again, to kind of like broaden this discussion out in general. I mean, I just think as a community, as a hockey culture, we need to seriously stop asking the question, is this guy worth it for what he brings on the ice? Not just Evander Kane, but just, people like
In
this in
general.
general. Is this guy going to be worth it to what he puts out on the ice? And start asking the question of, is he a good enough person to be a part of my team? I mean, that's the bottom line. Because, not for nothing, I'm not here to talk down on the Carolina Hurricanes or whatever, but they, as far as I'm aware, unless they have bought up somebody recently, they don't have anybody on that team who isn't white. I mean, let's just put it out what it is. And that was like the fundamental disagreement that really drove Tony DeAngelo out of. Well, they have Ethan
New
Bear.
York,
They have Ethan Bear. So I do apologize, Ethan Bear. I know he's
indigenous, right? Like
indigenous.
First Nations.
Yeah. So, granted, look, it's not like the Carolina Hurricanes are like, oh, we have to play Tony DeAngelo with, the guy he had a problem with, Keandre Miller, right?
Right.
Um, but that shouldn't be the thing, right? That's not. We shouldn't be like, oh, he'll be safe here. It's like, no, I just don't want him on my team because he's just a terrible person in general. Regardless of
It's like
whether or not he's
why do
gonna
we
have a problem
even
with anybody on my club, I just don't want him anyway.
Yeah, and like obviously personality conflicts aside, like an NHL locker room should be a harmonious place. Like you're all, especially if you're trying to win. Like, so I don't know why in Carolina, who's in a team who's in a position to win, would jeopardize that with a guy like Tony DeAngelo because sure, he was good with the Rangers. He didn't have any issues for a while. First couple of years, he didn't really have that many issues, but then all of a sudden, he had one big meltdown, and he ended up getting to a fist fight in the locker room with one of his teammates. Like, it's not. Is that worth it for you when you can go out and get a guy of similar skill level for less problems? You know, like let's be honest. Like, it's not like Tony DeAngelo is a game breaker. He's not a guy you can't replace. You know, same thing with Evander Kane. It's not like you can't replace him with another 20 to 25 goal scorer. There are plenty of them. So it's like we have to stop, like you said, we have to stop using this excuse of, oh, well, their on ice production justifies it. Because no, it realistically it doesn't. The guys that are always these problems are a dime a dozen and they're not superstars. Like they are replaceable, and teams should start treating them as such. You know?
And it's not like these are guys like, as much as they might have been pieces of garbage on the ice, these aren't like Ty Domi or like Rafi Torres type players where it's like, well, actually, Rafi Torres is a bad example. Let's say Ty Domi, right? Like one of the most notoriously hated players in the NHL, right? Everyone hated this guy. But generally speaking, like a lot of his problems are just on the ice because he was just an idiot.
Yeah.
Like,
And the other thing was like, yeah, and he was hated because, like you said, because of the things he did on the ice, like taking runs at people, throwing elbows. Like people didn't hate him because they were like, wow, Ty Domi walks in the locker room and is just an asshole and it's just unbearable to be around. You know? It's so I don't know. It's just a weird. It's just weird that we keep having to have this conversation seemingly over and over again. You know? Because
yeah,
like this
it's
isn't
just
the first time.
unfortunate.
Yeah, like it's not the first time a team has come to the defense of like a shitty player, and it's not, and obviously not in the case of Vander Kane, but like generally speaking, and it's not the first time that like a player has done something so outlandish that and been given a second or a third chance. In the case of Tony DeAngelo, it's just why, like, why keep giving these guys extra chances? There's nothing about them that makes them any more special than any other guy you can get in free agency that can do similar things. The only thing special about them is that they're absolutely fucking toxic and have no place in an NHL locker room. And if that's what you mean by like they're irreplaceable, then yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's just really not great. We'll talk about I guess, yeah. So just to kind of put a bow on it, you and I are in agreement here. Stop employing these people, please.
Just stop enabling these guys. Like, we make fun of the NFL for this very reason that they enable bad role models. They like, they keep letting guys who've been shown to be bad people continue to like thrive in the limelight. And unless the NHL wants to be on the same butt of the same joke, they have to start shaping up and they have to start taking this more seriously.
Absolutely. So, we'll talk about two different on ice things. I want to talk about Tuukka Rask, who
Oh yeah, he's rehabbing, right?
he signed with the Boston Bruins. He went down to the AHL, and he's expected to make his season debut as of the recording of this video in about a half hour tonight. We're recording this video January 13th at about 6:30. We started recording about 6 o'clock, obviously about 30 minutes in now. Expected to make a season debut against the Flyers. So, yeah, it's interesting, right? Like this whole big thing about Tuukka Rask, and when he left the bubble, everyone was like, "Oh, is his career over? Is he done?" A lot of Bruins fans, quite honestly, don't want him back, which is kind of weird. Um,
Yeah, I don't get that either.
and then the off season, there's people saying, "Well, could he sign somewhere else?" And he came out and said, "No, I'm not signing anywhere else. If I play anywhere, I'm playing in Boston." Um, and now I guess he's back. And I guess ultimately my question is this a good thing for the Boston Bruins? Like, do they need a guy like Tuukka Rask at this point?
Well, I mean, it always helps, right? To get like if Tuukka Rask can come back and be the Tuukka Rask we've known him to be, or maybe only be like a half a step to a step slower than he's been in recent years, with age and everything, then yeah, it's absolutely a good thing for the Boston Bruins because like adding depth in net for a team that's like bound for the playoffs is always a good thing, especially when like you're adding a veteran. Granted, people will make the comment that he's never won. He's not a winner, but the guy's gotten them to how many? So what, two, or yeah, two Stanley Cup Finals, and so it's like adding somebody of that caliber who's been there, done that, has done everything short of winning the big game. Yeah, I mean, especially for a team that's still got some defensemen that are a little younger, still getting used to the NHL, it can't hurt, you know. Not that saying that the goaltender they got from Buffalo they signed, oh, why can't I remember his name? Linus Ullmark.
Yeah.
Not to say Linus Ullmark and is it Swayman backing him up? Yeah, right, because they don't have Dan Vladar anymore.
Well, yeah. Vladar went to Calgary. I guess that was going to
Yeah,
be my point, right? Because when you look at the stats, right, Olmark is 12-5 with a 2.48 and a 9.19. Swayman was 8-6, 8-6-2 with a 2.26 and a 9.18. It's like, do you really need Tuukka Rask? But
I mean, no, you don't need him, right? The benefit I guess they have is that Jeremy Swayman isn't realistically all that old, so like throwing him into the third string role again won't necessarily stunt his growth or his potential growth, you know?
they sent that man back down to the AHL.
Yeah, so I
I'd
mean,
be kind of mad if I was him. I'm not gonna lie.
I would be too, but like, I mean, he's in a similar situation that Spencer Knight was in at the beginning of this year, you know? Before, well, not beginning of this year, but last year with, he comes in, plays well, but he also had to contend with Sergei Bobrovsky and Montembeault for the net. So it was like, it's not really fair, but, you know. But it's just wild. I didn't think Lisa Allmark was actually doing that well. Wow. I mean, I thought he was going to be good for the Bruins. I didn't think he was going to be this good, though.
The weird thing about this whole move to me is just how much more rope do you have with Tuukka Rask, right? Like, apparently, according to this article, he said he never considered retirement. I don't know if I believe him, to be
Especially
quite
considering he
frank.
waited till January to sign.
I don't know if I believe him just because A, yeah, like you said, he waited until January to sign, but also B, because of that whole debacle with the bubble and then kind of being a question mark for the Bruins to even come back that season after, when they ultimately
Yeah.
lost in the second round to the Islanders. Like, I don't know if I believe him with that, but he signs a 1 year, $1 million contract. He's 34. He's coming off hip surgery. I guess really my question would be, this isn't like he's 30 years old, right? And you're like, well, I know he might be considering an early retirement, but we're gonna get 5 more years out of him, right? Like, how much more time are you getting out of Tuukka Rask is really the thing. And is it worth, at this point, sending down your 23-year-old who's playing really, really well for you, you know? And to your point, again, you know, Swayman only has 26 games of NHL experience, but that being said, you know, is Tuukka Rask that much more of an upgrade over Linus Ullmark? I mean, I think he still is if he plays like he did when he played last year, but not by that much. So it's just kind of a weird situation, you know.
It's funny, like Boston just keeps running this 1A, 1B system, and then, I mean, they've been successful with it for the last, I guess, decade or so. You know, ever since Tuukka Rask took over, they've always had like a backup that they could rely on. I mean, we saw it with him and Halak, and it seems like when they were finally just cleared their logjam in net for guys like Swayman and Vladar to get their shot, they signed Linus Ullmark, which was like, okay, I guess if the all indications are pointing that Tuukka Rask really didn't want to play, but when he finally like signaled to your camp that he wanted to play, to your point, like why did the Bruins jump at it so quick? Like they realistically didn't need him, and honestly, I don't really think he's going to give them that much better of a shot than Linus Ullmark, because Linus Ullmark's been really good for them this year. Like, it's not fair to judge him or his ability to win games for you based on what he did in Buffalo, because Buffalo was terrible for his entire tenure there. You know what I mean? It's like basing Robin Leonard, your perception of Robin Leonard on Buffalo, which, let's be honest, a lot of us did. But, you know, in hindsight, it's like looking back on it, it's like, oh, well, we really passed an early judgment on a guy on a team that was clearly just not there for him, you know? So, to your point, like, I don't get why the Boston Bruins jumped so, like, fast at it, but I guess to try to look at it from their perspective, they're just trying to solidify and get as much depth as they can because they think they're probably going to make a deep run this year. I don't know how true that necessarily is. This isn't the deepest Bruins team we've seen, but I don't know. It's interesting for sure.
The only real argument I could understand you making, in terms of like this is a necessary signing, I can understand the argument that this is a signing that they could have made or maybe, you know, wanted to make. But your only argument really that this is a signing that they should have made is that Tuukka Rask has played 104 games in the postseason. Linus Ullmark has played 0. And so obviously Jeremy Swayman, I think, or did Jeremy Swayman, he might have played 1 last year. Yeah, he's played 1. Yeah, he got into one of the games against the Islanders, I think. Yeah, he did. He got into game 2 against the Islanders when Tuukka Rask got shelled. But that's really the only real argument I could see. Is like, well, you know, we don't know what we're going to get out of Linus because he's never been there. We need that steady presence in net. And I get that, but, you know, let's say Tuukka Rask signs with the Bruins, right? And let's assume they don't win the Stanley Cup. Because if you win the Stanley Cup, all sins are forgiven and every move you made was the best move you've ever made, right?
Right.
Let's assume that Tuukka Rask signs with the Bruins and they don't win the Stanley Cup. You know, they get out in the second round again. They have been in the last couple of years. You're just going to have the same problem next year. You're going to be like, oh, well, Linus Ullmark doesn't have any playoff starts. It's like, yeah, because you didn't play him last year. Like, you see what I'm saying? It's like you're solving a problem, but then you're not really, you're pushing
just a Band-Aid on it.
You're pushing the rock down the road, but the rock is still in the road. You know what I'm saying?
You just keep putting a Band-Aid on it. Like, it's putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Like, the thing's hemorrhaging, and you're just like, whatever.
You know, what are you going to do? Turn around next year and be like, oh, God, Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman don't have career playoff starts. We got to go get a goalie who has career playoff starts. Like, they're not going to get a start unless you play them in the playoffs. You can't solve this issue without letting them play.
And, I mean, if your whole reason is just for the postseason, I guess it makes sense. Because you do have to play a certain number of games in order to be eligible for the postseason. But, like, I mean, is this really going to put you over the top? Do you really think this is going to be the move that moves you into direct competition with the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning for the top of this division? Because I don't.
Considering it hasn't worked out the last 3 years, no.
Yeah, exactly. And your team is actually, like, on paper worse than it was the last 3 years you were competing directly with either the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Florida Panthers for top of their division, you know? Because like they lost Bergeron and Marchand are obviously another year older. They lose Chara a couple years back. They lose
Torrey
their second
Krug,
line center. Well, Torrey Krug they had straight
David
away, or they lost
Krejci.
their free. Yeah, they lose Torrey Krug a couple years back. They lose David Krejci. So I mean, on paper, this team isn't as good as it's been. I mean, they're staying above water. Obviously, they've been good, but I don't think this is a move that like needed to be made, and it's not a move that's going to put them over the top either. You know?
I could also understand the argument that with all the COVID issues and injuries that are going on, you want that third goaltender to give yourself a little bit of depth. Like you said earlier, just give yourself some organizational depth. God forbid Linus Olmark gets COVID. You do have Tuukka Rask to bring back, but I can understand that, like that want of having a third goalie, but I don't really think it needed to be someone who realistically would be commanding starting time. If you wanted like a
Yeah.
third goal, you could have gotten like a guy who's a 1A, 1B type, or more of a 1B than a 1A. Like, let's be honest here, Tuukka Rask has always been more of a 1A guy his whole career. He's always been like the starter, right?
I mean, if this was really your plan to carry a third goalie just in case of injuries or COVID, like why did you let Yaroslav Halak go? You know, like that's your perfect third string goaltender right there. I don't know whether he retired or not, but I know obviously the Bruins let him go. But it's just like, I mean, that's a guy who's been a perfect 1B to Tuukka Rask this whole time. And if your whole problem is that like you're worried about Linus Ullmark not having playoff starts, I mean, Yaroslav Halak has tons of playoff experience. I mean, he carried the Montreal Canadiens past the wasn't it the Boston Bruins to the Stanley all the way to the Eastern Conference Final? Like,
Yeah, in 2009. I think it was against the Capitals.
oh, it was the Capitals, you're right. But it's like, and obviously all the runs he made with St. Louis before he got traded out of there. It's like so you had a guy who probably wouldn't have bitched all that much if he rode the pine or was in the press box most of the year to go out and get a guy who you know damn well is going to bitch if he doesn't get on the ice a decent amount of time, if not the majority of the time, you know?
And it's also a consideration that Tuukka Rask coming off of injury is probably going to, considering the fact that, yeah, he's coming off injury and also hasn't played in like a year and a half, he's going to need time. He's going to need to get that rust off before the playoffs start. So it's not like you can say, oh, Rask is coming in clean and he's ready to go and he can back up Linus for the rest of the season. It's like, no, like you need to give Tuukka Rask time because he hasn't played a game since round 2 of the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
And
And
it's been quite a while.
and this would be a different story if say like Linus Allmark and Jeremy Swayman were struggling and it was like, oh, okay, they're bringing in Tuukka Rask, like this makes sense. But if this was your plan all year long, why not just bite the bullet and do it in September? And start the year with Swayman in the AHL and carry Tuukka Rask and Linus Ullmark as your 1A, 1B. Because now you wouldn't end up in the situation that you're in right now. You wouldn't have this perceived log jam in net where you've just forced Jeremy Swayman, who clearly has proven he has the ability to play at the NHL level, back into the AHL for no reason almost. Like yeah, sure, his record's not is only about 500, but like his every other underlying number is pointing to the fact that he is playing well. It's not his fault that he's losing these games, you know?
It's also one of these issues where you'd never know what this kind of move is going to do to somebody, right? Chances are, statistically speaking, Tuukka Rask will retire after this year, Swayman will play next year, and things will be fine, right? What happens if this stunts him, though? What happens if he gets disinterested and he's like, well, I have all these great numbers and I'm playing great and coach is loving everything I'm doing. But because, oh, here comes Tuukka, I got to go play in the AHL now. And what's the point? Am I
Right.
just going to get passed around like, sloppy seconds every time some new guy comes into town? Am I even going to play next year? Am I going to come back to the team next year? 2 months into the season, we sign, I don't know, friggin' Yaroslav Halak back, and now I'm back in the age. Like, you never know what this kind of move is doing, so why mess with the groove? I mean, this kid is
And the other
23 and
thing,
he's grooving right now.
And the other thing is like to that point, it's just like, what if Tuukka Rask takes this same situation into next year? What is that going to do to a player like Jeremy Swayman if he comes in and he's playing and he's playing well again, but he always has the cloud hanging over his head of, well, what if Tuukka all of a sudden arbitrarily just decides to come back and now I'm fucked? Like my career is in the hands of this guy who doesn't know what he wants. You know, it's got to be really frustrating as a player. And it's got to be kind of frustrating to be a teammate too. Like if you're the Boston Bruins locker room, yeah, sure, you're probably glad that Tuukka's coming back because like you've known him forever. But at the same time, as like, bro, we've been in the trenches for the last 4 months almost. Like we've been fighting like tooth and nail every night to get these points, and you just come waltzing in here when you feel like it. Like, bro, the bell rang 15 minutes ago, and the fight's already over. It's almost over, and now you decide to show up. You know, it's just like it's a bad look, honestly. Combined with the fact that he dipped on them in the bubble, like combine those two, that and this, and everything in between that's happened with him in the media, it's just not a good look for Tuca, you know?
This is interesting. Reading this article here by 98.5 Boston Homes for Sports. They asked Sweeney, how Jeremy Swayman took the news, and he said he said he was disappointed but not overly surprised based on what was trending and how it was tracking for Tuukka's health. The biggest thing that came out of my conversation today was Swayman just stared at me and said, well, if those guys struggle, do I get the net? Yeah, that's the kind of competitive nature that you want to hear.
That's a bad sign.
But
That's a
like,
really bad sign.
it kind of almost sounds like Swayman's like hoping that they struggle, because again, this isn't some guy who's struggling himself and he's getting sent down and he's like, all right, listen, like I've been
Like, I
bad, I
get
gotta
it.
rehab myself here, right? Like he's done nothing wrong, and now you're being like, hey, Tuukka's back, go to the AHL, and like he's just looking at you dead in the face and being like, well, if they're bad, can I come back? It's like,
I mean, the fact that they said the fact that he stared at him like that doesn't mean like that doesn't bode well. Like I don't like the sound of that whole interaction because like how do you broach the subject of how do you start that conversation? Hey, Jeremy, this is Don Sweeney. Come meet me in my office in 15 minutes or whatever the fuck. I don't know. And he walks in and he's like, "Hey, Jeremy, he's like, sit down, sit down. You've been great. You've been doing everything amazing. Coach has nothing but nice things to say to you, but you're going to the A." Like what? Like, and to even frame it as like, "Oh, this was always the trajectory." Like you should have at least let Swayman know that the plan was if Tuca becomes healthy enough and becomes available to us, he is going to be the option because clearly you just blindsided him because the reaction you got out of him was not, "Oh, I understand." It was, "But like, if they struggle, can I come back?" Like I don't get why I'm leaving. You know what I mean? And I get why they want him to go to the AHL and want him to play, but it's like, would it have been more beneficial just to carry him as the third goalie, maybe put him on the taxi squad, and this way he gets to practice with the team, he stays with the team, he still gets the NHL experience?
well, unfortunately, he didn't qualify for some reason. I don't know what the rules are with the taxi squad, but he didn't qualify. So
Oh, okay. I mean, they still could have carried him as a third goalie for practice and stuff. There's any number of combinations of things they could have done probably that are better than, "Hey, kid, you're doing really great. Get out of here."
I mean, even
You
his
know?
advanced stats are pretty good. Like his goal saved above average is a 3.8, so he's saving roughly about four more goals on average than he should have. Like it's not like there's some underlying analytic here where you're like, oh, he's not doing good. He's got a 2.26 with a 9.18, and he's saving four more goals above average than he should have. Right?
I'll tell you
Like,
exactly what this is. This is the Henrik Lundqvist situation in New York all over again. It's like it's the weight and the legacy of somebody like Tuukka Rask coming in and like having some sort of like nostalgic for the organization anyway, like some nostalgic feeling of like, "Oh well, Tuukka's always been our guy. We know he's the guy. Like let's bring him back into the fold." Where it's like, yeah, but Jeremy Swayman's bright and shiny and he's brand new and he's right here. Like, why are you going to keep driving around in your 1999 Ford when you can drive in a brand new 2021 Jaguar? Like, what's the point? You know?
I'm just gonna
But
call it now. If this happens again next year, he's gonna ask for a trade. I
he
guarantee
should.
it.
He absolutely should.
He's gonna be like, look, screw this. I'm not getting jerked around because Tuukka Rask wants to come back. And again, I don't want anything to come off as like us indicting Tuukka Rask as like a person. Like I'm really happy for him. Great, he gets one more shot at a cup. I think he's one of the better goalies we've ever seen in a Boston Bruins uniform. It's cool to see him come back, but at the same time, from a hockey perspective, it doesn't make that much sense. And B, it also kind of sucks because it was really kind of cool seeing Jeremy Swayman develop. This kid from Anchorage, Alaska, coming in and playing for the Boston Bruins, doing well. He's 23. He's like, oh, could this be the next young thing? And like, now he's going back to the AHL. And it's like, yeah, okay, sure. Theoretically, it's only for the rest of the year, but then what happens next year if like he just doesn't want to play for you anymore? Like.
Yeah, and this isn't like the Spencer Knight situation, right? Where in Florida they had three goaltenders and they decided to go with Spencer Knight, and Spencer Knight struggled, and then they sent him down. Swayman, like we've been saying this whole time, didn't struggle, did nothing wrong, and got screwed.
Yeah.
I mean, and this isn't an indictment of, like you said, of Tuukka Rask. I think it's more of an indictment of like the Boston Bruins organization, because I don't know. I just don't like the way Don Sweeney made that sound like, oh, it's been tracking this way the whole year. Like this is the way we were thinking. It's like, well, clearly you need to communicate that to your players better. Like, if your plan is going to directly impact a player, I feel like you have a right. They have a right as a player to know, and you have an obligation as the general manager, as the boss, to sit them down and be like, listen, this is what we're planning for. Things can change, right? If he had sat down Swayman at the beginning of the year and had that conversation, I think Swayman would have it would have been a much better reaction to this than what we got. You know?
If you ask me, if you want my opinion, I honestly wouldn't have even signed him. I would have been like, listen, Tuukka, like, you kind of, not that you played your way out of this position, but Jeremy and Linus have played their way into it more so than that. Like,
I mean, yeah, like the ship sailed, man.
nothing against you. Obviously, we're not gonna like take anything away from you. You could argue honestly that he's the best Boston Bruin goaltender ever. I think he leads them in most major stats, but it's just like with Lundqvist in New York. Like these things move on. But
Yeah.
kind of a weird situation. I do want to end off the podcast here. I do want to talk about what the hell is going on in Edmonton, and like just we touched on them earlier with the Evander Kane thing. Just like I don't know what's going on, right? So like currently they sit out of a playoff spot. They sit 3 points out of the second wild card spot, granted with 3 games in hand. They sit 3 points out of third place in the Pacific with 2 games in hand against the LA Kings. Why is this team struggling so much in a division where, realistically speaking, like
They shouldn't be.
the Pacific Division is very odd this year, right? Because you have Seattle, who's obviously struggling. We knew that they were going to struggle. Vancouver, the Vancouver is the Philadelphia Flyers West. I'm just going to say it. A team that like on paper is way better than they are, and I don't understand what's going on with them. They are the Philadelphia Flyers of the Western Conference. Don't know what's wrong with them. The Flames, who started off really hot, have cooled off significantly since. But the Kings and the Ducks, who like on paper aren't the greatest team, I really think in terms of Anaheim's case, it's very much the case of strong goaltending covering up a lot of really bad wounds. I mean, they're not even above 500, right? They're 19, 13, and 7. So like if you combine wins and losses, they're 19 and 20. I genuinely think when it comes to them, it's just John Gibson covering up a lot of like really ugly wounds that this team has.
I mean, the thing with Anaheim and LA is like they're about where I expected them to be, like 500, a little above 500 maybe, because they still have some good players on those teams, but like Edmonton really is just like
what is going
bad.
on?
Bro, I don't know. It's been like since what? I want to say since like December, they've just been like in a tailspin. Because what? Draisaitl and McDavid were both averaging like 2.5 points a game through like most of October, November, and December, and then all of a sudden, they just dried up and the team just stopped winning. It's kind of wild, honestly. But I mean, it goes to show like everything we've been saying about the Edmonton Oilers is the truth. Like they're a helicopter. They have strength down the middle, and otherwise they have nothing else. They have nothing to show for it. I mean, oh, wow, they went out and got Zach Hyman. Yeah, Zach Hyman's a guy that can get you maybe 50 points, maybe 25 goals on a good year. You know, he's the type of player that I think they needed, but they overpaid for him, and it didn't address any of the other underlying issues, which is like you don't have any top six legitimate scoring wingers to play with McDavid and Draisaitl. So you end up having to double up on McDavid and Draisaitl in your top six all the time. And guess what? If you stop them, you stop the whole Edmonton Oilers. And their goaltending has been awful. I mean, I'm not even gonna
Yeah.
mix words. Like it's just been bad. But like, I mean, we knew the goaltending wasn't gonna be great because like they're dying on. I mean, they're dying on the hill for Mikko Koskinen and like
And
I,
Mike Smith for some reason, who they keep bringing back.
bro. I hope Mikko Koskinen appreciates everything that the Edmonton Oilers have done for him because they've honored one of the worst contracts ever signed in the last 6 or 7 years, and have not made any attempt to try to get out from underneath it. They were like, you know what, Ciccarelli fucked us on this one. We're gonna eat it. We're just gonna eat it. And like, I mean, granted, now nobody's gonna try and trade for him for the $4 million he's worth, but like, there was a brief window, like a small window, where the Edmonton Oilers might have been able to get out from underneath that contract and have made no attempt to do it. So their goaltending issues are by their own design, so I don't feel bad about that. I mean, it's like the one hole we keep pointing to in Edmonton for I don't know how many years now. It's just like, bro, they can't stop the puck. So doesn't matter how many goals Connor McDavid scores if they're still putting in like 9 goals a night. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and even the odd part about the goaltending situation in Edmonton is that they have Stuart Skinner, who's playing, considering that he's on the Edmonton Oilers and the defense that they have, a 2.70 and a 9.16 is pretty good.
I mean,
Like,
the save percentage is about league average.
like
You know,
he's another one of these young 23-year-olds who's playing pretty well, but he hasn't played in a game since December 18th. Which, granted, the Oilers had their big pause, but there's been 5 games since then. They played the Blues, the Devils, the Islanders, the Rangers, and the Leafs, and he still hasn't got back into a game because they
what's their
started.
record in those 5 games?
Uh,
I know they
let's
lost to
see.
the Rangers.
Uh, they lost to the Blues, that's 0-1. They beat the Devils, so 1-1. Lost to the Islanders in overtime, so 1-1-1. They are 1-3-1 in that time. And the
Yeah,
weird
that's
part
not
about
good.
that is like, yeah, okay, we're not going to beat the dead horse. The goalies suck flat out, outside of Stuart Skinner, who's not getting playing time for some reason. The goalies
Yeah.
suck. We knew that. They're not even scoring that many goals either. Now, say what you want. Oh, Connor McDavid went into COVID protocol. Great. Okay. Yeah, he missed a game. I don't care. Like,
Yeah, but his pace had slowed down dramatically before that. Both him and Draisaitl, you know.
2 goals against the Blues. Okay, cool. You scored 5 goals against the Devils. Proud of you. 2 goals against the Blues. 2 goals against the Islanders. 1 goal against the Rangers. 2 goals against the Leafs. That's not going to cut it. The way this team is designed is to score as many goals as possible, and now they're not even doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I wonder if that's like an unintended a consequence of hiring Dave Tippett as their head coach, who's been known to be more of a defensive coach. But if that was your plan, then you should have adjusted your personnel accordingly. And maybe, obviously, like they signaled that they were moving in a more of that direction with the Hyman signing and all that stuff, and moving Ethan Bear out. But you still got to play with what you have on the ice. And like this is not a team built to play like a hard, grinding defensive style of hockey. It's just not. Because you see it when they try to, they lose. You know. I mean, they tried to go check for check with the Rangers, and they couldn't. They couldn't hang. They couldn't do it. And now this isn't me saying, "Oh, the Rangers are blah, blah." But like the Rangers have been a team that's moved in a direction to be a little more physical to match with their high end, and I really think that's the direction Edmonton should be moving in. But they've made no attempt to try to remedy any of these problems. And now that their goal scoring is dried up, they got nothing.
Oh,
You
they
know, like
announced
they
the
don't.
All-Star roster. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say like they don't do anything particularly well. Like their power play, I think at the beginning of the year was firing at close to 50% for the first month, and then obviously they came back down as they got more of them and like the numbers regulated. But like, I mean, when they played the Rangers, they got like 2 or 3 power plays. They went like 0 for 3 on the power play with like 3 shots on goal. It's like, okay, if you're the Edmonton Oilers, the one thing you cannot do is not score on at least one power play.
Yeah.
When you have Darnell Nurse, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, or not even Darnell Nurse, Tyson Barrie, Jesse Puljujarvi, and take your pick of Nugent Hopkins or Kyle Turris or whoever, there's no reason you guys aren't scoring on your power plays. And I don't know during the Ranger game they brought up the stat like what their struggles have been on the power play of the last I don't know how many games, but it was obviously like bad. This is real high end analysis here, but their power play
Yeah.
has been bad, and I mean their penalty kill. Oh, I mean their penalty kill has been bad for last like 15 years probably. Like has not gotten any better. But I don't know, man. I don't.
It's just everything's fallen apart for the Edmonton Oilers. And by the way, I just flipped on the game. We do have confirmation that Tuukka Rask is scheduled to start tonight for the Bruins, so we'll see how that goes. I don't. The real issue with the Oilers is I don't even know if you can make any like super big changes at this point. Like
No.
because the things that you need were things that would have had to have come in the offseason because they desperately need a goaltender. They desperately need like a Jacob Slavin or an Adam Pelech type defenseman who's just there to defend. Because even Darnell Nurse has started to really relish the offensive part of his game. And I'm not saying he's a bad defender by any means, but he's not. I'll just lay it out on the line. I think guys like obviously Jacob Slavin, but I honestly think guys like Adam Pelech and Ryan Pulock are better defenders than Darnell Nurse is. And it seems like that's both a product of him relishing that offensive game, but also like the team putting pressure on him to play up more. And top four defensemen and starting goaltenders are not easy to come by in a regular season. Even when teams start to sell at the trade deadline, they're usually selling like role players, depth, bottom six guys, like middle six forwards. You're not really gonna find a team like selling out a guy like Adam Pelech on the trade deadline.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if they were looking for role players, because if they were looking for role players, last offseason was the time to do it too, because the Tampa Bay Lightning were selling off all of their
Their
bottom
bottom
six
six
forwards because they couldn't
forwards.
afford them, and they were part of they were part of the best bottom six in the league. Like Blake Coleman, Barclay Goodrow, like all these guys were available, and Edmonton made no attempt to get any of them. Instead of going out and overpaying Zach Hyman, who honestly isn't that much better than a guy like Barclay Goodrow or Blake Coleman, if you ask me. I just think like his numbers are a little more inflated because he had like that synergy with Austin Matthews. But you know, regardless, it's just Edmonton's at this point now where it's like, how do you right the ship without selling it all off? Because they don't really like have pieces to trade in return for these things. Like they don't have prospects really. They have some, but not many. And the ones that they have are blue chippers that they're not going to want to move. Guys like Kent Johnson and all that stuff. So they're in a tight bind. And the other problem is they've got a lot of money tied up in a very small percentage of their roster.
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and for
Yeah.
some reason their solution is to go get guys like Duncan Keith.
Yeah. Who's oh God. Like and I get it. Duncan Keith isn't the worst idea, right? You bring him in, you shelter him. He's a good bottom pairing defenseman. He gets maybe number two power play time. He doesn't get any tough minutes, doesn't get any big matchups, and he's just there to like help develop the young guys and be like a leader. But that motherfucker's playing in their top pairing. Like he's their number one pair, like matchup guy, and it's like he is not a number one matchup defenseman anymore. I
Nope.
mean, obviously Duncan Keith at one point in his career he was one of the best defensemen in the league, but like you can't treat a 37 or however old he is. I think he's like 36 or 37. 36-year-old Duncan Keith like 25-year-old Duncan Keith because he's just not the same player. He's not. He can't skate like he used to. He doesn't have like the offensive ability he used to. So it's just like why was that your option? Especially when Seth Jones was available,
Yeah.
you know?
Well.
Like and I mean, Chicago really didn't give up a lot for Seth. I mean, they did. They paid a high price for him, but it wasn't something that we all looked at. We're like, well, this is kind of a. They kind of got more than fair value for him. You know what I mean? Like, that was a good hockey trade. And there's no reason in my mind that Edmonton couldn't have made that hockey trade, especially when they had a guy like Ethan Bear still on the roster. You don't think Columbus would have jumped at the opportunity to get an NHL ready defenseman over a guy like Adam Boquist, who yes is projected to be a blue chipper, but might not be NHL like an NHL like contributor for 2 or 3 more years. Whereas Ethan Bear is maybe not as good as he's going to get yet, but he's still already an NHL contributor.
You
You
know what's
know?
a real kick in the pants about that whole thing too? Duncan Keith's making $5.5 million for this year and next year.
Mm-hmm.
Seth Jones is making 5.4 this year.
Yep.
They literally paid $100,000 more to not have Seth Jones on their roster. Granted,
I
look,
mean,
he's making 9.5 next year, but that gives you this entire year
to figure out that
to figure
fit
out
that
that.
into the cap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Actually, you wouldn't have even had to really have figured it out because Miko Koskinen's $4.5 million comes off the books, and you wouldn't have paid Duncan Keith 5.5 for next year if you would have signed somebody for a 1 year contract. Duncan Keith and Miko Koskinen combined make $9.9 million. You
Yeah.
don't sign Keith, you let Koskinen's contract expires. Boom, Seth Jones.
And he's like exactly the type of player that Edmonton
I
needs. You know what I mean?
don't
Like a number
understand.
one. I like, and granted, who knows how the negotiations went with the Columbus Blue Jackets, right? But I may be forgetting, but when Seth Jones hit the market and it was very clear that Columbus was looking to move him, I don't even think Edmonton's name was ever thrown into the ring. You know what I mean?
It
And
was like the Blackhawks. I think the Flyers were one of the names there. I don't recall offhand
yeah, of course,
that the
yeah, I
Oilers
don't
were
either.
part of. I don't think the Oilers were part of at least any major like rumors. Maybe at the
Yeah,
beginning people were like speculating should he go there, but as it heated up, I don't really remember them being as like a big part of it.
right. So let's just say, like, to cover our bases, let's just say that we don't remember the Edmonton Oilers being seriously involved. But that being the case, that's kind of damning in and of itself. You know what I mean? Like a number one defenseman hit the market, and you didn't at least kick the tires on it. I mean, like, what is wrong with you? I mean, like, the Rangers didn't need Seth Jones, and I know the Rangers at least made a phone call into Columbus, like, hey, what's the asking price? Oh, no, we can't. No, 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 no. Never mind. You know what I mean? Like, I think when a guy like Seth Jones hits the open market, you should have 31 phone calls from every GM in the league asking you what the value is. Then you gauge interest from there, right? Who's actually interested and who's just kicking tires. But the fact that Edmonton never came up in any of these rumors that we can remember, in asterisks, um, is kind of damning. I mean, I just don't understand. Like, here's a guy that checks every single box you need. He's 26, check. Same age in the same age bracket as McDavid and Draisaitl, check. Is an excellent shutdown defender, check. Can play on your number one power play unit, check. Like, kills penalties, check. Eats Guy can play 68 minutes in a 5 overtime game and not even look like he's tired, check. Like, what did Ken Holland look at and go, nah, Duncan Keith's my guy? Like, what? Like, I don't get it.
It's very it's just stupid. I mean it like I'm not even going to show it. It's dumb. It's very dumb. And not only is this team struggling defensively, which obviously we knew was going to be the case, that's nothing new. They're not even doing what they're designed to do, which is score goals. And I don't care. Say whatever you want about Connor McDavid being out. Obviously, missing a guy like Connor McDavid is going to hurt your team. But it just kind of goes to show you that the Oilers are such a one-trick pony with McDavid and Draisaitl that McDavid being out completely torpedoes the entire team. Like,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
mean,
there are teams. Every team is missing guys at this point. I mean, at one point, I think all 31 teams had somebody on the COVID protocol list, and a
I'll
lot
put
of
it to
them
you
were
this
big
way.
names too.
The Rangers lost Igor Shesterkin and Artemi Panarin to COVID protocol and still won games. They beat the Edmonton Oilers without Igor Shesterkin and Artemi Panarin, and the Edmonton Oilers had Connor McDavid still. You know, so if your argument is, I'm not saying obviously yours, but just like in general, if an Oilers fan argument is, oh well, we just lost Connor McDavid to protocol, isn't that kind of damning in and of itself? You're literally admitting that your team is not built well enough to compete without your star player. Is literally what you just said to me. So like, okay, that's not an excuse. That's like, you're just like, you shouldn't be using that as an excuse because like your team is just clearly not good enough without him. Because there are teams, like you said, there are teams that lost guys, big names that still are winning.
I mean, it's kind of like it's not like the Oilers are missing McDavid plus like 7 other players, right? Like they're
Right.
missing
It's not like
McDavid and they're missing Tyson Barrie. I understand that concept, but they still have Draisaitl, they still have Zach Hyman, they still have
still have the
Darnell
Nuge.
Nurse, still have well Nuge is LTIR right now, but
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
you still have Jesse Puljujarvi, Kyler Yamamoto. Like you have these core pieces of the team. It's not like I mean, even the Pittsburgh Penguins were missing Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin in the beginning of the season, and they were still winning hockey games.
Let's be real about it. It's not like they were the New York Islanders who got their whole season essentially torpedoed by losing the whole team to COVID at once. You know what I mean?
2 guys on injured reserve and 8 guys on a COVID protocol list and still playing
Yeah.
hockey games.
Yeah, so it's like if the Edmonton Oilers are if it was like the whole team was gutted and the Oilers were like, yeah, we just got hit with COVID and we can't deal, I'd be like, all right, yeah, I get it. Like there's more to this here, but it's like one guy. And granted, the one guy you have is the best player in the league that's on protocol, but like the reality is it's still just one guy on a team, you know? Hockey's a team sport. It's the greatest team sport on earth. So like you really can't use the excuse that you lost one player to explain the fact that you guys aren't winning games right now.
You still have a guy who's arguably, not even arguably, who's a consensus top 3 player in the NHL in Leon Draisaitl.
Yeah, he's arguably the second best player in the league right behind the guy you just lost.
It's like, he's either number 2 or number 3, depending on
like,
who you ask. So
yeah, exactly. It's like, oh no, I lost Connor McDavid, the consensus #1 pick. Who's the guy I got? Oh, a guy that's arguably maybe better or on the same level as Nathan fucking McKinnon. Oh. Like, what?
So, yeah, we're just lost on the Oilers. We always are. I'm gonna say it right now. Honestly, if nothing changes about this roster, I think that they peak out at maybe a second round team this year if they make the playoffs at all. I mean, if they make the playoffs, they could probably win their first in division matchup against the Pacific Division teams, but I don't see them getting anywhere close to coming out of the West. And quite honestly, at this point in Connor McDavid's career, really anything less than a third round appearance is a failure of a season. There's no excuse anymore. You're not rebuilding anymore. That ship has sailed. You should not be in the same position you were in 3 years ago.
I don't to your point, I don't have a lot of confidence in this team either because this is on paper mostly the same team that got smashed by the Blackhawks 2 years ago.
On home ice.
And the Blackhawks are terrible. Like, full stop. Is terrible. Like, they were, and they will be terrible for like the next foreseeable future. And you still lost a playoff round to them. They shouldn't have even been in the playoffs, bro. Like, you lost to a team that wouldn't have made the playoffs under any other circumstances. Like, how do you do that?
And that series didn't go to 5 games either. It went to 4.
And how do you look like the team that shouldn't have been in the playoffs? Like, how do you finish higher than them and you look like the team that was in 12th place? Like, how does that happen?
And like, I know that like there was no fans in the stands, but it's still your building. It's your rink. You're the ones that should theoretically be most comfortable going to the locker room, knowing how to navigate the building. You're close to home, so you can do all your, well, not at that point because you're in the bubble, but you probably have all the amenities of your home within the bubble. So like, there's no excuse. You know what I'm saying?
So it's just like if
you
they got
lost to
smashed by
Corey
the
Crawford, dude.
Yeah, like a Corey Crawford who got traded to Chicago, or not traded to Chicago, traded to New Jersey and retired like 2 months later. Like, you lost to Chicago with a defense where their #1 pairing was still Brent Seabrook and Duncan Keith. Like,
they didn't even have Seth Jones at that point.
And at least for the Blackhawks team, I could say they've gotten better in the last couple of years. This Edmonton team has stayed pretty much the same thing, and if they have no hope of getting out of the West, like you said, bro. They're gonna get smashed by whatever Central Division team they run into, if they even get that far.
I mean, yeah, last year they got swept out of the playoffs by the Jets. That was embarrassing.
And the Jets were a wild card team, weren't they?
Yes, because
because
Edmonton won the division,
finished top of their division. Yeah. That's what I thought. It was just like, what? Like, bro.
I'm actually curious about something real quick.
You get swept by the wild card team. And granted, the Jets are better than a wild card berth, but because of like the division they play, and they can only realistically hope to grab either a wild card,
Oh my God, the Flyers are so bad. Sorry, good.
No,
It's
you're
two
good.
nothing. It's two
All
nothing.
good.
Less than 6 minutes into the game.
Carter Hart starting.
Yeah,
Good thing I didn't start him.
but yeah,
That's another thing
what
we
are you
should
gonna
talk
say?
about that next week. We should talk about like Philly and whether Carter Hart should be looking for like an ejection seat.
Yeah, next week, the All Star rosters were just announced, so we'll talk about that next week. That'll be a kind of a brief conversation, because there are some interesting guys. Not just one thing, but Adam Pellick All Star. Hey,
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that the defensive guys are getting a look this year. But
we
we could
should
see Adam Pellick and Adam Fox as a defensive pair. That'd be sick. Well, even no, it's
bro.
gonna be 3-on-3. So yeah,
Yeah, Matt, but even still, it'd be like Ryan Lindgren and Adam Fox, but like way better because Adam Pellick is like way bigger than Ryan Lindgren. And like that's being said, I love Ryan Lindgren, but still.
Adam
Um,
Pellick is like sleeper top 10 defensive players in the NHL.
oh yeah, bro. His shutdown ability is honestly, his shutdown ability might be on par with guys like Jacob Slavin, just in raw ability to like stop offensive production and like
I think
disgusting.
so. I certainly do think so.
Yeah, maybe
Let's
we'll
see.
talk about some all-star snubs too, guys who didn't get on that we thought maybe should have gotten on. I mean, I don't think there's many after looking over the rosters. Like, this is really a lot of what I thought should be here, but I mean,
Yeah.
we can still talk
So
about it.
next week we'll touch on the All Star stuff. We'll talk about the Flyers because I think the conversation that I want to have about the Flyers is whether or not obviously you said should Carter Hart be looking to get out. I'd want to have the conversation of is it time to rebuild in Philly. I think that's a conversation we need to start having. So
Well,
those will
especially
be at
considering
least two
like,
topics for next week.
especially considering Philly was supposedly on the end of their rebuild.
Um, the Oilers last won a playoff series in 2017 where they beat the Sharks in the first round and lost the Ducks in the second round.
And realistically, they should have beat the Ducks in that second round.
Then they
They
missed the
were,
playoffs for the next 2 years. Then they lost to the Blackhawks in the qualifying round on home ice, and then they got swept out last year. So in the last 5 years, they've won one playoff series and missed the playoffs twice. And realistically, I don't consider teams that were in the qualifying round as having made the playoff. I know the NHL does, like
yeah,
you were
but they
considered to
didn't.
make the playoffs, but like you weren't in bracket. It's almost like when you play like a professional esports, like you drowned in pools. You didn't make bracket.
Exactly. You were in the play-in round and you didn't get in.
So in the last 5 years, they've made the playoffs twice in my book and won one series, and then didn't even win a single game last year. I mean, like, what? This is a team that has the best player in the NHL and a top three player in the NHL. Really?
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing when you really look at it.
So Edmonton Oilers fans, I'm sorry. I know we're kind of doom posting about your team here for a little bit, but it's just the reality that they're not good. So, oh yeah, and then maybe by next week, because there's also the last man in voting, right, for the All Star game. So there'll be like
Yeah.
I think one person from each division. I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know when that ends, but we'll see. Is there anything you want to kind of say, wrap up before we finish here?
I don't think so. I think that's pretty much it.
Um, at some point, I think maybe the week after next, we'll do our halfway mark podcast. Just because right now, so many teams are all over the place. I mean, you have teams who have played 37 games, like the New York Rangers, and you have teams like the Islanders and the Senators who have played 28 and 29. So, like,
Yeah, it's real weird, man. Like,
so we'll do our halfway mark podcast maybe 2 weeks from now when a majority of teams have caught up to the halfway mark. But next week, yeah, All Star stuff. Talk about the Flyers and just what the hell is. I mean, I went to your city, Flyers fans. I watched it. I watched the game in the Wells Fargo Center. I watched you guys play the Penguins, and that was one of the most embarrassing things I think I've ever seen in my life. So I don't know, but yeah. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys again next time.
you know,